like a good camera and lighting really shows the imperfections of your face. Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. So I'm a really big fan of like true crime, murder mysteries, all kind of stuff like that. There's this YouTuber I really like called Bailey Sarian, and she basically does this really cool thing where she does like murder mystery stories and makeup, and I really like murder mystery stuff and I really like makeup, so I thought I would take some inspo and do my own. So I'm going to be doing my makeup and I'm going to be telling you about the Albert Fish case, because makeup and murder mysteries totally go together. That's totally a thing that works. Before I start, I just wanted to say a little disclaimer. This is a pretty unpleasant story. I don't want to cause any offence to anyone. It does involve like nasty stories surrounding the murder and rape of children. So if this thing isn't for you, I'll be doing a beer video very, very soon. And yeah, basically it's a bit of a horrible story, it's a bit heavy, but if you're kind of okay with stuff like that, stick around, it'll be fun. So like I said, this is the case of Albert Fish. So he was actually born as Hamilton Howard Fish. He was born on the 19th of May 1870 to Randall and Ellen Fish, and he had many names. He was known as the Brooklyn Vampire, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Grey Man, the Boogeyman, the Moon Maniac. When Albert Fish was born, well, when Hamilton Fish was born, his dad was 75 years old and his mum was 32 years old, so there was 43 years between them, which is quite big. Little baby Hamilton was the youngest of 3 living siblings. He had a dead brother who was called Albert. That's kind of where he gets his name later. So the 3 siblings, there was Walter, there was Annie, and there was Edwin. As a child, he was described as small, quiet, and unassuming. And he suffered with a lot of mental illness as a child, but all of his family did. His brother was actually in an asylum and his mum suffered from regular hallucinations. His sister Annie was diagnosed with mental affliction and his uncle was diagnosed with mania. So his family wasn't particularly the happiest of families, and he didn't really have a very happy childhood. When Albert was 5, his dad died of a heart attack and his mum was basically left on her own as a single mum to raise his family, and she just couldn't do that. So she ended up sending all of her kids to an orphanage. Albert/Hamilton was sent to St. John's Home for Boys. It was an orphanage in Washington. He was about 5 or 6 when he was sent there. And he was actually there until he was 8 years old. While he was there, he was given the nickname Ham and Eggs, which is kind of a weird nickname, and I don't know how he got it, but I assume because his real name was Hamilton. Ham. He didn't like this nickname, so that's when he changed his name to Albert. He got that from his brother who had died, and then for the rest of his life he was known as Albert. When he was at this orphanage, he was abused very, very frequently by the caretakers there. The children were often encouraged to like hurt each other, which is absolutely horrible, and weirdly, disgustingly, Albert enjoyed this pain. He said, "I was there till I was nearly 9 and that's where I got started wrong. We were unmercifully whipped. I saw boys do many things they should not have done." When he was around 9 years old, his mum was basically able to secure a job and then she could take her kids out of orphanage. Basically, she could take them back, she could look after them. He obviously hadn't had a really good like education growing up, so he wasn't particularly smart, but he was really good at working with his hands. And when he was 12 years old, he was actually in a homosexual relationship with a telegraph boy. It was a very, very strange relationship. Like, this boy, who Albert was in a relationship with, he introduced him to really weird sexual practices that revolved around him eating his own feces and drinking his own urine. That's nasty, Albert. He would also visit public baths on his weekends, and he would just chill out there and watch boys undress. When he was 20, he moved to New York, and when he was there, that is when he started his crimes against kids. So when he first got to New York, he made some money as being a prostitute, and in his free time, when he wasn't working, he would lure young boys and torture them and molest them and do horrible, horrible things to these poor boys. So in 1898, his mum kind of wanted him to get married, so she set up an arranged marriage to this woman called Anna Mary Hoffman. She was 9 years younger than him, and they ended up having 6 kids together. They had Albert, Anna, Gertrude, Eugene, John, and Henry Fish. And in this time, he wasn't a prostitute anymore. He actually got a job as a house painter. They moved to Delaware, and he painted people's houses and stuff like that. And apparently his kids had a relatively normal childhood. Like, I'm going to talk about a bit of stuff later that he did, but they had a sort of okay childhood. Through all of this time, like through his marriage and having kids, he would still like go away and he would like molest young children, but he would never molest his own kids. He also cheated on his wife loads. He had a load of like male lovers like on the side. I don't know if like she knew about this, and even if she did know, she probably would like turn a blind eye to it because she was like, nah. At this time, this is something that would be like frowned upon so heavily. One of his male lovers took him to a waxwork museum on like a date they had, and on this date he came across a bisection of a penis and became absolutely obsessed. This is when his obsession with sexual mutilation started. When I was researching this, I accidentally looked up a bisection of a penis, and it's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. Okay, so in 1903, he was arrested for grand larceny, which is basically stealing someone's personal property. I'm not entirely sure how long he was there for, but in 1910, he was working in Delaware and met a 19-year-old man called Thomas Kedon. This is kind of like a big starting point in his sort of like serial killer life. He took Thomas back to where he was staying, and that's when they started in a sadomasochistic relationship. And it's kind of not really sure how much Thomas consented to this. Albert later went on to say that he was mentally, intellectually disabled, but we're not like 100% sure. He could have literally taken advantage of this poor man, but like, we don't know. After 10 days of meeting this guy, after meeting Thomas, he took Thomas to an old farmhouse and he tortured him for 2 weeks. And he tied him up and he cut off half of his penis. He said, "I shall never forget his scream or the look he gave me." So, like, we don't know if Thomas, like, consented to this at all. I mean, why would you consent to this? But, like, there are some weirdos out there, so... Anyway, Albert wanted to kill Thomas, he wanted to cut him up, he wanted to take him home, and he wanted to eat him because he was really, really obsessed with the idea of eating someone. But, get this right, he was really worried. It was quite a hot day, and he was worried that the flesh, the meat would spoil and it wouldn't taste nice enough for him. So instead he poured peroxide over his wound, rubbed it in Vaseline, he like wrapped it up in a dirty old rag, gave him a $10 bill for his troubles, kissed him goodbye, and then got on the next train home. He said he never knew what became of Thomas. He never like cared or never went back to check on him. He was just like, yeah, whatever, I'm done. We will skip ahead a few years now to 1917. Albert's mental health issues were just becoming worse and worse, and obviously there wasn't really kind of like people to go to. You couldn't really go to a doctor or a psychiatrist in these times because one, it was completely like looked down upon, like it was really bad for people. Like you could end up in prison for stuff like this. And maybe like, you know, maybe he like didn't know. Maybe he didn't realise he had all of these mental health issues. His wife Mary had met this man called John Straub, and she had left him one day and her 6 kids to run away with this man. Literally, Albert was at work one day and then he came back and his wife had just left. She'd taken like a few things. I think she'd taken some like furniture to pay for things like, well, her and this guy had like run away, and he came back and just like gone. Not much longer after she'd actually left, she came back with this John guy and was like, "We have no money, can we like come back and stay with you?" And Albert was like, "Well, you can stay, but John is not gonna stay, like no way." So Mary moved back in and things were going okay until Albert discovered John living in the attic. And he was like, "Look, Mary, you can stay, but John has to leave." And they both just left and she never came home again. I don't think her kids ever saw her again. She just upped and left. Obviously, after all of this drama, Albert was like a changed man. I mean, he was already a bit of like a weirdo. Like, as we know, but something just snapped in him. He started having hallucinations. He was once like wrapped himself in a carpet, and he kept saying that John the Apostle had told him to do it, and he started getting like voices in his head like telling him to like kill kids apparently. So he began to develop these sadomasochistic tendencies, which led him to an obsession with self-mutilation, and he basically used to love bringing pain to himself. So when he was a kid in school, remember, he used to like enjoy being beaten. Like, he used to like revel in it. He would hit himself with a nail studded panel, and he would get these nails, he would get this really long nails, and he would like push them into his groin so far that he could never get them out again. They did an x-ray on him years later, and there were 29 nails embedded in his groin. This man had like serious issues. Like I said, he claimed he never abused his kids. He would, however, get his kids to like partake in his little like sadomasochistic games that he had. He would like go on all fours, and he would get his kids to like hit him with his nail-studded panel until blood ran down his legs. He'd also get a lighter fluid soaked dowel, and he would put it up his bum and he would set it on fire just for a bit of fun. Good old Albert having a nice bit of fun. After his marriage ended, Albert would look at adverts in the newspaper. These adverts basically were from women who were looking for husbands, and he would write letters to these women. He would reply with the most vulgar and obscene letters, and they were absolutely disgusting, and surprise, surprise, the letters were never published and he never got a reply from these women. Like I said, he was really interested in the idea of cannibalism. He would prepare like meals for him and his family of raw meat to try and get like used to the idea of like eating human flesh. He really wanted to satisfy this craving. So he hadn't killed anyone at this point. He'd done some very bad things and he'd really hurt a lot of people, but he'd not actually killed anyone yet. Like, before committing his first murder, he was tested at numerous like psychiatric hospitals, and every single hospital deemed him as sane, no danger to society. So by 1917, his obsession with cannibalism and just killing people really made him contemplate murdering someone. But he was worried he'd be captured, and he didn't want to go to prison because he wanted to like murder people, obviously. So he started targeting people he didn't think would be like missed. He'd look for vulnerable children, so he'd look for children of colour and homeless kids and people like that, people he didn't think would like anyone would care if they went missing. He would also pay kids to like bring him other kids. He would pay them money to be like, oh, bring me a child, and like tell them to come play with me and I will give you like $10 or something. And this was really clever, because if you do that, then no one's even going to see. You've got absolutely zero proof against you. No one isn't a witness apart from the child. In 1924, Albert was suffering from full-on psychosis, and this is when he said voices in his head were telling him to kidnap and kill children. So, in July of the same year, he was spying on this girl called Beatrice Keel, and she was just playing like on her farm or somewhere like that, and her mum saw Albert spying on her and scared him off, which probably saved her life. That same night though, he returned to the farm and he slept in their like stable area. Luckily though, her dad found him and scared him off straight away. So then he was like, cool, I'm gonna kill this little boy. He was called Cyril. Cyril Quinn, his name was. He'd already been molesting this boy, and he was like, cool, I want to kill him and I want to eat him. So he invited Cyril and his friends around to his house for some sandwiches, and while he was making the sandwiches, the boys were all wrestling on Albert's bed, and they accidentally like pulled the mattress off and uncovered loads of these horrible like tools. They discovered his implements of hell, as Albert liked to call them. There was a knife, there was a handsaw, there was a meat cleaver. Anyway, the boys obviously like freaked out and ran home straight away, so luckily this boy escaped too. So after this, he was like, well, I need to up my game because I really want to kill someone, but every single person that I try and kill is like running away from me. He's looking through the newspaper and he was looking at adverts for like young men who were looking for jobs. He was looking to find young men who were trying to find some work for themselves. This is when he came across the Budd family, and he was really interested in killing this guy called Edward Budd. He was looking for some farm work. Albert decided, right, I'm gonna hire him, he's the one, I'm gonna hire this guy, and then I'm gonna kill him. He went under a fake name of Frank Howard, and he visited the Budd's house to inquire about Edward. Obviously, Edward was like, yeah, sure, like, totally, would love to come and do some work for you. So Albert was like, yeah, cool, you and your friend, you can come and do some farm work for me. Albert said he would meet up with them in a few days, but he never showed up. he just never did. He did send a telegraph apologising though, and he was like, sorry, I was busy or something, we will rearrange. And he did, you know. He returned a few days later, and he was like, cool, let's rearrange. But this is where he met Edward's 10-year-old sister, Grace Budd, and he decided, I don't want to kill Edward anymore, I want to kill Grace. He started to develop a plan, and he didn't want to waste any time, because obviously all of his other victims had like gotten away, so he was like, I need to act fast. Albert was like, cool, Edward will like meet up again at a later date, and he made up this story that his niece was having a birthday party in town, and was like, oh, does Grace want to come? And her parents were like, oh yeah, that's fine. He was like, yeah, she can come with me, I'll look after her, and we'll go to this party. And they were just like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like, this man that they didn't even know. What the hell, this is crazy. They left that evening to go to this party, and they never saw Grace again. They didn't know what had happened to her, although obviously they suspected Albert, but there was no trace of him. Obviously he was using a fake name, he just disappeared, and nothing happened. So they suspected Albert, but couldn't prove him guilty, and also couldn't really find him. It took them 2 years to arrest him. Finally they did, and his trial was on the 22nd of December 1930, and he was found not guilty. He spent a total of 108 days in jail. They had another suspect as well, a guy called Superintendent Charles Edward Pope, and he was like their prime suspect. And like during this time where he was just like out of prison, he was like killing other kids. He abducted and killed 4-year-old Billy Gaffney. He was playing with his friend and Albert came up, and his friend told police that Billy was abducted by the boogeyman, which is where he got that name from. When he was later finally arrested, spoilers, he admitted to killing Billy and described in immense detail of how he killed him. I'm not gonna say how he did it because it's honestly one of the most disgusting things I've ever heard, but if you do want to look that up, you can find that online. There was also another boy he killed. He was called Francis Mcdonald. He was like playing with his friends or family next to some woods, and he went missing. Not long after he went missing, people went in the woods to look for him and they found him dead. And then the case went cold. They had no idea what happened, they had literally no clue, and for 6 years they just didn't know who had murdered Grace or where she was. That is until November 1934. So 6 years after Grace disappeared, her family got a letter. This was a letter from Albert, and he had sent it to the family, and apparently it was so horrible that his mum couldn't read it and she had to get her son to read it to her. And you literally can find this letter online, but I don't want to read it because it's absolutely horrible and it's just not very nice. I'll briefly explain what the letter entails, but I don't want to read it word for word just because it's not very nice and I don't really want to focus on something that nasty in my first like video. He basically says how Grace sat on his lap and kissed him, and then he decided he was gonna kill her and eat her. And he did just that. He took her to a house in the middle of nowhere. There wasn't a birthday party. He took her there and he took all of his clothes off so blood wouldn't get on his clothes, because he was like, well, I don't want blood to get on my clothes. Oops. He strangled her to death and then he cut up her body and he ate her. It took him like 4 days to eat her body. I think it was 4 days. But yeah, he like ate all of her body. So I don't think they like ever found her, because there was like nothing left. I honestly like can't even imagine as well like what the family had to go through. They didn't know where she was for 6 years. The case went like absolutely like cold. Yeah, and then one day they just like get this letter like out of nowhere, and it just like says in the most disgusting like immense detail and just like a horrible way like what he'd done to their daughter. Very nasty man. Anyway, so after they got this letter, it was horrible, it was absolutely traumatizing for them, but at least they knew who had killed Grace. He was obviously arrested immediately. Duh. And once he was arrested, he was very like forthcoming with information. He didn't really hold anything back. I guess because he had sent that letter, he was kind of like, well, I'm gonna get arrested after this. Like, he basically gave himself away. And when he was like talking about all of these horrible things he'd done and all these children that he killed and like ruined people's lives, he used to sit there and smile. He was like so proud of himself. On the 11th of March 1935, his trial began. It lasted 10 days and he pleaded innocent, which is absolutely crazy. I know, it's just like, what the hell? But he pleaded innocent on account of insanity. He said he had all these voices in his head. They were telling him like what to do. They were like, you need to kill kids. But after 10 days, they found him guilty. Thank goodness. And they sentenced him to death, to die by electric chair, which apparently he was really excited about. Like, the hell. And before he died, he was allowed to give a series of notes, a series of handwritten notes that he was going to give to the press and journalists who were like working on his case. He gave them to his lawyer, and his lawyer refused to hand them over. He said, quote, "I will never show them to anyone. It was the most filthy string of obscenities that I have ever read." And I can believe that. Like, the letter he wrote to Gracebird's parents was horrible, and then like he used to write letters to people looking for like husbands, and he would send them like really horrible letters that were just like so vulgar. On the 16th of January 1935, Albert Fish was sentenced to death. Apparently his last words were, "I don't even know why I'm here." That hasn't been proved though. It could be a lie, who knows, but honestly I wouldn't put it past him. He seemed like a crazy guy. Like, anyway, that is the case of Albert Fish. I don't really know how to end this video because it was a bit pointless and a bit of a weird one, but thanks for watching if you did. I'll see you in the next one. Probably be a beer video if I'm honest. Goodbye.